Hello and welcome to part 2 of our cognition unit. This time we're talking about forming concepts. Okay, so let's talk about forming concepts and categories. Humans and many other animals are really good at category learning, right? We like to take things and sort them into categories that tell us information about what that object is, right? It's like a little shortcut to thinking about something, right? If we know that something's a bird, for example, we know a few things about it based on the common traits that all birds share. But how do we form our concept of bird, and how do we decide if something fits our concept of bird? So a concept is a mental category of objects or ideas based on shared properties. We use this as a mental shorthand to economize our cognition, right? To make things faster and easier. Concepts formed through learning attributes of categories. So we learn attributes about those categories that we're thinking about, and we can use those to form our concepts. Okay, let's talk about some more specific stuff about how that works. Start off with the concept of a prototype. So a prototype is the most typical instance of a particular concept. So we'll stick with our example of bird. If I ask you right now to go ahead and imagine a bird, you can probably conjure up some sort of mental image. Maybe it looks something like this, right? Smallish thing, little beak, beady eyes, small and light. Looks about like that. This is an idealized thing that may not exist as you conceptualize it, right? So your image of a bird might not be any one bird that exists in the world. It might just be like a thing that is about like most birds that you know, right? So that's your prototype, a typical instance of a particular concept. An exemplar is an individual instance of a concept or a category. So the more closely an item matches the prototype of a concept, the more quickly we identify that as being an example of that concept. So this little bird here looks a lot like the bird that we have in mind, right? When you imagine a bird, it's a little bit different, right? Like its wing is different than we might have imagined it. Its coloration, its pattern is slightly different, but it looks about like the bird we have in mind for our concept of bird. So when we see this, we think, oh, that's a bird. And if we imagine a bird, we could probably name a bird like this as an example of that category. This is less likely to meet our expectation of bird, right? You're less likely to come up with something like this if I ask you what a bird is. This albatross is a giant seabird, and it might not be a great example of your concept of bird. Likewise, something like an emu or a giant eagle might not be something you call to mind very quickly when you think about birds. They are exemplars, right? They fit the prototype, but they're kind of a bad match. They don't have many features in common with your prototypical example of what a bird is. Okay, how about this? Call to mind your prototype of a bachelor. Are these guys bachelors? What does it mean to be a bachelor, right? When you think bachelor, you might think Chris Evans or someone like that, a young, handsome guy, very eligible sort of bachelor, unmarried, right? So, yeah, that's a bachelor, but what about this guy? I don't know, I suppose, right? He's an unmarried man. That's the definition of bachelor that I guess I'm working with, so sure. What about this baby? He's shaving. That's something bachelors do, right? Well, technically he's an unmarried man, but I don't know if I'd call him a bachelor. Maybe a bachelor has to be a certain age, so maybe I'll revise my concept of bachelor a little bit. So yeah, are these guys bachelors? It's a matter of your categorization. How do you define that category, and do these exemplars fit or not? So as I've been getting at, one of the issues with forming concepts is that some things are better category members than others, right? You have some things that match the prototype very nicely and some things that do not match the prototype very nicely. This is because categories are kind of not very clear cut. They're based on our experience and our interaction with the world, and sometimes they're not very well defined. There may be disagreement on category members, right? So there are many famous sort of internet disagreements on category membership, like is a hot dog a sandwich? It's a piece of meat that sort of sits between bread. So yes, no, I don't know. What does it mean to be a sandwich, and is a hot dog a member of that category? Let's say you put some milk on cereal. Is that a beverage? Is it a broth? Or is it a sauce? Right? I guess it depends on how you define those things. Milk could be any number of those things. Let me know what you think milk and cereal is. Is it a beverage, a broth, or a sauce? So a natural concept is a category that is formed by experience, right? If we form a category by our experience with those things in the world, we can call that a natural concept. So one of the most common ways we categorize is by comparing them to our prototypes. That is the best sort of mental images of a concept that we have, right? The best examples of a concept we have. So sticking with the same example for consistency here, imagine a bird, your sort of normal prototypical bird. Okay, something like that maybe? All right, that seems like a pretty standard bird. Oh, maybe that nice little robin. That's a bird that we know. What about all these? Do these fit? How about a bird that you can eat, like a chicken? Or about a nocturnal animal that hunts, like an owl? A waterfowl, like a pelican? Maybe a really colorful tropical bird? Or a vulture, maybe? Or a flightless bird? Flamingos? These are all birds, but they're probably not something you thought of right away. Some of the things are good examples of birds, right? Things that you call to mind immediately when you think of the word bird, and some things are a bit of a stretch, right? A toucan or an emu or an ostrich or whatever this is, those probably don't come to mind nearly as quickly as our sort of typical examples, prototypical examples of what a bird might be. There are also theories that we don't just use really one prototype. We might compare new items to several classic examples or exemplars rather than to just one perfect prototype, right? You might not just have one thing in your mind of what bird is. In the same way, if I ask you if a kazoo is a breath instrument, you might compare that to several other breath instruments that you know, like a tuba and a trumpet, or maybe even an oboe. And you might say, okay, it has some features in kind with these things. I guess it's technically a breath instrument. It's kind of like some of these things, so sure. Not the best example, but I guess it fits. Okay, that's it for this one. Next time we are on to problem solving and decision making.